Ilara's footsteps echoed softly against the cobblestones, blending with the rhythm of the midnight rain. She pulled her thin cloak tighter around her shoulders, but it did little to stop the chill that seeped into her bones. The streets were nearly empty, except for the occasional shadow slipping along the walls and the distant glow of lanterns flickering in the windows of noble houses. She had stayed late at the market, helping an elderly vendor pack her wares. It had taken longer than she expected, and now she was running the risk of being late. Again. The thought tightened her chest. Being late was a serious offense in the household where she worked. Punishments were harsh, and the mistress of the house had little patience for excuses. Ilara had learned long ago that kindness was often punished. Yet she could not ignore those who needed help. She had grown up in the shadowed alleys of the city, where the poor learned quickly to depend on each other. Her heart ached for anyone in pain, and she had never been able to turn away. A sudden sound stopped her steps. A low groan carried on the wind came from the side alley beside her. Ilara froze. Her instinct screamed that danger might lurk, yet she could not let fear rule her. She slipped into the alley, the rain soaking her hair and clinging to her dress. There, huddled against the wall, was a man. His clothes were dark and torn, and his face was pale beneath a layer of dirt. Blood stained his sleeve, and his breathing was shallow. Ilara's heart leapt. Without thinking, she rushed to him, kneeling beside him in the mud. "Sir, can you hear me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The man's eyes fluttered open, revealing a sharpness that startled her. There was power in those eyes, a commanding presence that made her feel small, yet strangely safe. He tried to speak, but only a faint cough escaped. I'll help you," Ilara said. She tugged her cloak off and wrapped it around his shoulders, hoping it would warm him. She looked around for something to support him, spotting a discarded wooden crate. Carefully, she lifted him onto it, wincing as he groaned in pain. Ilara's mind raced. She had no idea who he was, but the man was hurt badly. She remembered the herbal poultices she had bought at the market and quickly applied them to his wounds. Her hands shook from both the cold and the fear of being caught in the streets after curfew, but she ignored it. Her only focus was keeping him alive. Hours seemed to pass in a blur. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the mist crept along the alley like silent spirits. Ilara spoke softly to the man, urging him to stay awake, telling him he was safe. Occasionally, he murmured words she couldn't understand, and his eyes would flicker open with a glint that seemed to pierce through her. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to touch the rooftops, she helped him to his feet. He leaned heavily on her, and she supported him, guiding him toward the quiet outskirts of the city where the streets were still empty. "Who are you?" she asked, breathless. The man's lips curved into a faint smile, but he did not answer. His eyes met hers, holding her gaze longer than was comfortable, yet she could not look away. There was a weight there, an authority she could sense even without knowing his name. Before she could speak again, the sound of approaching feet startled her. Guards. She realized with a jolt that she had spent the entire night outside, ignoring the curfew. Fear gripped her chest like a vice. If they caught her, she would be in serious trouble, possibly dismissed from her position. "Go," she whispered urgently to the man. "I can't stay, or they'll fire me. Please, go." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, the mist seemed to swirl around them, hiding them from the world. Then, with surprising strength, he stepped away. "I will not forget this," he said in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. Ilara blinked, her heart pounding. She did not wait to hear more. She turned and ran, splashing through puddles. Her dress clinging to her legs, her hair plastered to her face. She arrived at the mansion just as the sun rose, golden light spilling over the grand gates. Her mistress waited at the entrance, arms crossed and eyes cold. "Elara, you are late again," she snapped, her voice sharper than any whip. I'm sorry, ma'am," Elara stammered, dripping wet. Your excuses are meaningless." The mistress cut her off. "Pack your things. You are dismissed. A maid who cannot follow simple rules is of no use to me." Alara's stomach dropped. She tried to protest, but her words caught in her throat. She had been fired. Again. She felt a mix of anger, shame, and sorrow swirl inside her. But deep down, she knew she had done the right thing. She had saved a life, even if it meant losing her job. She gathered her meager belongings and stepped out into the morning streets, feeling both lost and strangely free. The mist still lingered, curling around the corners of the city like whispers of secrets. As she wandered, her thoughts kept returning to the man in the alley. Who was he? Why had he been there, injured and alone? And why had he seemed important? Unbeknownst to her, the man watched her from a shadowed rooftop across the street. His dark hair fell over his forehead, and his eyes followed her every movement. Kale, the Alpha King, master of the kingdom and feared by many, had been observing her courage and kindness throughout the night. He had expected fear and cowardice from anyone who stumbled upon him in such a state, yet this maid had defied every expectation. Her heart was bold, her spirit unyielding, and her actions selfless. Kale felt something stir within him that he had not felt in years: curiosity, fascination, perhaps even admiration. And yet, he remained hidden, unsure of how to approach someone so ordinary and yet so extraordinary. His kingdom was vast, filled with politics, power struggles, and betrayal. No one could be trusted, and yet he could not ignore her, the small maid who had dared to save him. That day, Elara wandered the streets, feeling a strange mix of loss and relief. She did not know that her life had already changed, that her path had crossed with a man whose destiny was tied to the throne, a man whose secrets could either destroy her or elevate her beyond anything she had imagined. And in the quiet shadows, Kale made a silent promise to himself. He would find her again, not because he needed her, but because he wanted to understand her, the maid who had shown courage when all others had faltered. The city slept on, unaware that fate had begun to weave a new story, one of danger, desire, and a bond that neither Elara nor Kale could yet understand. And as the mist lingered over the cobblestones, carrying whispers of secrets and destinies, neither of them knew that their lives had already begun to entwine in ways that could not be undone. Elara returned home, tired and wet, unaware that the world was watching, and that her simple act of kindness had set in motion a chain of events that would draw her into the heart of darkness, power, and a love she could never have imagined. And far above, in the shadowed heights, Kale's eyes glimmered with a storm of emotions. He had seen her bravery. He had seen her heart. And he would not forget. A new day had begun, and with it, a story that would challenge everything both of them believed about courage, destiny, and the power of a single act of kindness. Elara had barely slept. Her small room felt colder than usual, and the memory of the man in the alley haunted her thoughts. She wondered who he was, why he had been there, and how he had survived the night. She tried to focus on the chores she had to do, but her mind kept wandering to the shadowed figure who had captured her attention with just one look. Her day passed in a haze. She wandered the streets, still wearing her damp cloak from the previous night, trying to ignore the curious glances of passers-by. It seemed as though something had shifted in the air, an invisible weight pressing down on the city. Then, just as the sun began to dip behind the distant towers of the palace, she felt it, the presence, It was subtle at first, a quiet warmth in the space around her, yet undeniable. Her pulse quickened. She turned abruptly, half expecting to see the man from the alley standing there, and he was. Kyle appeared as if from the shadows themselves, stepping into the fading light of the evening. He wore a cloak darker than midnight, and his eyes, sharp and intense, fixed on her with an unreadable expression. Even in the soft glow of twilight, his presence demanded attention, a silent authority that made the air feel heavier. "Ilara," he said, his voice low and smooth, carrying a weight she could feel in her chest. She froze. How did he know her name? Panic and curiosity surged through her. I don't know what you mean," she said cautiously. Cale's gaze softened slightly, though the intensity did not leave his eyes. "I saw what you did for me," he said. "You risked yourself for a man you did not know. That is not something I forget easily." Ilara's heart pounded. She had acted out of instinct, out of kindness, not expecting recognition, much less from someone who seemed so powerful. "It was nothing," she whispered, shaking her head. I couldn't leave you there." "Nothing." Cale's voice carried a hint of disbelief. He stepped closer, and she could feel the heat of his presence. "You defied the law, risked your job, for a stranger. That is not nothing, Ilara." Her cheeks flushed. I can't help it," she admitted softly. "I don't know why I do these things. I just see someone in need, and I can't turn away." Kyle studied her, and for a moment, he looked like a man who had not spoken to anyone in years. His eyes softened, and she caught a glimpse of something fragile beneath his commanding exterior. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by the sharp, calculating look of a king used to being obeyed. "You are brave," he said finally, "and foolish, both qualities I admire." Ilara's heart skipped. Brave? She had never thought of herself that way. Foolish? Perhaps. But to hear it from him, it made her feel both nervous and alive. Cale extended his hand. "Come with me," he said. "You need not fear. I only wish to ensure your safety and offer you an opportunity. A maid of courage like yours is rare, and I wish to see more of your character." Ilara hesitated. There was something magnetic about him, yet overwhelming. The streets were darkening, and she had nowhere else to go. I don't know," she murmured. "Trust me," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Or at least, try. You have nothing to fear." Reluctantly, she took his hand. The moment their fingers touched, a strange warmth traveled through her, like fire meeting ice. It was unsettling and thrilling at the same time. Kyle led her through the winding streets, the mist curling around them as though it were alive, whispering secrets she could not understand. They reached the edge of the city, where the forest began, dark and dense. There, hidden behind ancient trees and walls of ivy, stood a palace unlike any she had ever seen. Its towers rose like jagged teeth against the sky, and the windows glimmered with a golden light that made it look alive. Cale guided her through the gates, which opened silently as if expecting them. Servants appeared without sound, bowing to him, their eyes wary but respectful. Ilara felt small, like a shadow in a world of grandeur and power. This is your palace," she whispered, unable to hide her awe. Kyle nodded. "Yes, and you will stay here. I will provide a position for you as my personal assistant. You will learn the ways of this house, and in turn, you will see a side of the world few have the privilege to witness." Ilara swallowed hard. The idea of working here so close to someone as enigmatic and commanding as Kyle made her both excited and afraid. I will do my best," she said softly. Cale's lips curved into a faint smile. "I do not expect perfection. I expect courage. And so far, you have shown more than most. The days that followed were unlike anything Alara had experienced. The palace was alive with secrets and whispers. Servants moved like shadows, and every corridor seemed to carry a weight of history. Kale's presence was constant, even when he was not speaking. She felt his eyes on her, studying her, and she could sense his power even in moments of quiet. Despite her awe, Alara remained herself, curious, compassionate, and stubbornly brave. She learned quickly, earning the respect of those who doubted her, and slowly, Kyle's cold demeanor began to soften when she was near. He would speak to her in rare moments of quiet, asking about her life, her thoughts, even her dreams. One evening, as the moon rose high above the palace, casting silver light over the gardens, Kale approached her. "Alara," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There is something I must tell you. Something dangerous. Something that affects the entire kingdom, and me." Her pulse quickened. She had seen fear in others, but never in him. "What is it?" she asked, stepping closer. Kale's eyes darkened. "There is a curse upon my bloodline," he said slowly. "A shadow that drains life and binds me to this throne in ways few understand. It is old and powerful, and it will not wait for me to grow stronger. One day it will claim everything if it is not broken." Ilara's heart ached at the weight in his voice. He was a king, feared by many, yet in this moment he seemed fragile, almost human. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked softly. Kale shook his head. "It is not that simple. Only someone pure of heart, brave enough to face darkness without fear, can help me. Most would flee, most would fail." Ilara's throat tightened. She did not fully understand, but her instincts told her that she wanted to help. She wanted to stand beside him, to be a part of something greater than herself. Before she could speak further, a sudden noise shattered the quiet. Shadows moved among the trees, faster than the eye could follow. Kale's eyes sharpened instantly. "Stay behind me," he commanded. The night erupted into chaos. Figures cloaked in black emerged, attacking without warning. Kale moved with a speed and strength that seemed almost supernatural. Ilara froze, fear and awe mingling in her chest. She wanted to run, yet she could not leave him alone. Kyle deflected a strike with a precise movement, and then, without hesitation, pulled Ilara behind him. The world narrowed to the sound of their breaths and the clash of weapons. Somehow, amidst the danger, Ilara felt a strange connection to him. They were not just king and maid, they were two souls thrown together by fate, bound by courage and circumstance. When the attackers finally retreated, disappearing into the shadows as suddenly as they had come, Ilara and Kale stood in the garden, panting and trembling. The moonlight shone down, casting long shadows that seemed almost alive. Kyle turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You are brave," he said softly. "I underestimated you." Ilara looked at him, her own chest heaving. I didn't want anyone to get hurt," she whispered. Kale's gaze softened for a brief moment, but then he stepped back, returning to the mask of the Alpha King. "The world is not as simple as right and wrong," he said, "but you might change it if you are willing to follow me." Ilara felt both fear and excitement swirl within her. She had stepped into his world, a world of danger, power, and secrets, and she had no idea how far it would take her, or how deeply it would change her heart. And Kale had seen something in her that no one else had, something that made him question the walls he had built around himself, the loneliness he had accepted for so long. As the mist rolled in around the palace gardens, curling like silent witnesses to their encounter, neither of them knew that their bond had already begun to form, a bond of courage, trust, and something far more powerful than either could yet name. The night was quiet now, but the threat was not gone. Somewhere in the shadows, danger still lurked, and as Elara looked at Kale, standing tall and commanding in the silver light, she realized that her life had changed forever. She was no longer just a maid. She was a part of a story far larger than herself, one of power, mystery, and a connection that could not be broken, no matter the darkness to come. The forest stretched before them like a living wall of shadows and silver light. Mist curled between the trees, carrying the faint scent of moss and damp earth. Elara's heart pounded as she followed Kyle, her small hands clutching the hem of her cloak. She had never seen a place so alive, and yet so dangerous. Kale moved through the trees with the ease of someone who belonged to the darkness. Every step was sure, every motion precise. Elara struggled to keep up, her lungs burning and her legs heavy. But she refused to slow him down. Fear mingled with awe. She could sense the power in him, even without seeing it fully, and it both thrilled and terrified her. "This forest," Elara whispered, glancing around. "It feels alive." Kale's eyes, dark as midnight, scanned the shadows. "It is," he said. "It holds secrets older than any kingdom, and some of those secrets are dangerous. Stay close to me." Elara nodded, stepping closer to him. There was an intensity in his presence that made her feel both protected and exposed, as if he could see every thought and fear she had. She felt a strange pull toward him, a connection she could not explain. They walked in silence, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a night bird. But the silence did not comfort Elara. She felt the weight of the forest's gaze, as though it were testing her, judging her. Finally, they reached a clearing. In the center stood a stone altar, covered in runes that glowed faintly under the moonlight. The air was colder here, heavier, and Elara felt a shiver run down her spine. "This is where the curse began," Kale said quietly. His voice was tense, almost reverent. "Long ago, a betrayal bound my bloodline to this land. The magic drains life, isolates the one who holds the crown, and feeds on fear and loneliness. It cannot be broken by strength alone." Elara's eyes widened. "Then, what can break it?" she asked, her voice trembling. Kale looked at her, his gaze piercing. "Only someone who is brave enough to face the darkness willingly, someone who sees beyond fear and power, can help me. Most would flee. Most would fail." Her chest tightened. She did not fully understand, but a strange certainty settled in her heart. She had faced fear before, fear of being punished, fear of danger, but nothing like this. And yet, she felt that she could not turn away. I will help," she said softly, surprising even herself. Kale's expression softened, just for a moment. "You do not know what you are saying," he murmured. "This path is dangerous. It will test everything you are, and everything I am." Elara stepped closer, her hand brushing the edge of the altar. "I don't care," she said firmly. I will not leave you to face it alone." Kyle studied her, a mixture of awe and concern in his eyes. "Very well," he said finally. "Then we begin." The forest seemed to respond to their presence. The mist thickened, swirling around them like living shadows. The runes on the altar pulsed with a faint light, and the air grew heavier with the weight of ancient magic. Elara felt a tremor of fear, but she gripped Kale's hand tightly. "Do not let go," he said. "Whatever happens, stay with me." Elara nodded, her fingers tightening around his. She could feel his strength, but also a vulnerability she had not expected. Beneath the mask of the Alpha King, there was a man who had been burdened for centuries, alone in ways she could only imagine. Kale placed his hands on the altar, and the runes flared brighter. Shadows danced around them, twisting and forming shapes that whispered threats and doubts. Ilara gasped, stepping back instinctively, but Kale held her close, his presence anchoring her. "Do not fear them," he said. "They are illusions. They will try to break you, to make you turn away. Only courage will keep you standing." Ilara swallowed hard. She could see her own fears reflected in the shadows. Fear of failure, fear of pain, fear of losing him, but she refused to give in. She closed her eyes, drew a deep breath, and focused on the truth she felt in her heart. She wanted to help him, no matter the cost. The shadows hissed and lunged, but she stood firm. Kyle's hands were steady on hers, guiding her, his voice steadying her trembling mind. "You are stronger than you know," he whispered. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The runes glowed brighter, and a wave of energy surged through the clearing. Ilara felt it in her bones, a pull that threatened to overwhelm her. She gritted her teeth and held on, refusing to let fear win. Then, suddenly, the shadows recoiled and the air cleared. The altar pulsed one final time, and the oppressive weight lifted slightly. Ilara staggered, and Kale caught her, steadying her in his arms. "You did it," he said, his voice a mixture of relief and admiration. "You faced it. You did not falter." Ilara looked up at him, her chest heaving. It's not over, is it?" she asked. Kyle shook his head. "No, this is only the beginning. The curse is weakened, but it is not gone. The kingdom, my enemies, they will not forgive weakness, and there are those who would use this moment to strike." Ilara's hand found his, holding it tightly. "Then we face it together," she said. Kale's eyes softened, and for a moment he looked less like a king and more like a man who had longed for connection. "Together," he agreed. The night was silent for a few moments. The only sound their breathing and the faint whisper of the forest. But the peace was fragile. In the distance, a figure watched from the shadows, cloaked in darkness. Kyle had enemies, and they would not rest. Ilara felt a thrill of fear, but also a strange excitement. She had entered a world of magic, power, and danger, far beyond the life of a simple maid. Yet she had no regrets. She had chosen to step forward, to face the darkness, and to trust a man who seemed untouchable, yet vulnerable. Kyle studied her, his expression unreadable. "You are extraordinary," he murmured. "Most would have fled. Most would have given up. But you are different, brave, selfless, and foolish in the best way." Ilara smiled faintly, feeling warmth spread through her despite the chill of the forest. "Perhaps foolishness is the only way to survive in a world like this," she said softly. Kale's lips curved into a rare, almost shy smile. "Perhaps," he said. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something deeper, that made her heart quicken. The forest seemed to settle around them, but both knew the danger was far from gone. The curse had been challenged, but it still lingered. Kale's enemies would not rest, and the forest itself held secrets yet to be revealed. Ilara looked up at him, feeling a strange mix of fear and trust. She had stepped into a world of shadows, magic, and kings, and she had no idea how far it would take her. Yet she felt alive in a way she never had before. Kyle reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. "We will face whatever comes," he said quietly. "But you must promise me something." "Anything," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Do not doubt yourself," he said. "Your courage is the key. Without it, without you, I cannot survive this." Ilara felt the weight of his words, and yet they gave her strength. She nodded, her fingers tightening around his. "I will not falter," she promised. Kyle studied her for a long moment, his eyes dark and unreadable. Then, slowly, he let a hint of vulnerability show, a small crack in the armor of the Alpha King. "Good," he said finally. Then we begin the next step. The path ahead is dark and uncertain, but together, we might succeed. The forest held its breath, the mist curling like silent witnesses. And as Alara and Kale stood together, hand in hand, they both knew that the journey ahead would test everything they were and everything they hoped to be. The shadows of the past lingered, the curse still whispered, and unseen enemies waited. But for the first time, Ilara felt that courage, kindness, and trust could shape the course of fate. And somewhere deep in the forest, beyond the light of the moon, the next challenge awaited, ready to test the bond they had begun to forge. A bond of bravery, trust, and something far more powerful than either could yet name. The forest was darker than ever, the mist thick and swirling like living spirits around Ilara and Kyle. The stone altar glowed faintly in the moonlight, as if responding to their presence. Every leaf, every shadow seemed to watch them, aware of the momentous choice that awaited. Ilara's hands trembled slightly as she reached out and touched the altar. The runes pulsed beneath her fingers, cold yet alive. She felt a strange energy flow through her, a mixture of fear, power, and hope. Kale's hand found hers again, firm and grounding. "You are ready," he said quietly. His eyes searched hers, full of both trust and unspoken worry. "No one else could do this. Only you have the courage to face what lies ahead." Ilara swallowed hard. I will try," she said, though her voice barely carried over the wind. "I won't leave you." Kale's lips curved into a faint, rare smile. "That is all I ask." The forest seemed to respond. Shadows rose from the ground, twisting and stretching, forming shapes that whispered doubts, fears, and regrets. Figures from Kale's past, enemies, traitors, even the faces of those he had lost, appeared, flickering like ghosts. They moved with a life of their own, reaching for him, for her, for something neither of them fully understood. "Do not let them touch you," Kyle warned. "They will try to scare you, to make you turn back. Focus on what is real. Focus on us." Ilara's heart pounded. She had never faced anything like this. She could feel her courage faltering, fear clawing at her mind. But she looked at Kale, his strength, his vulnerability, the man behind the king, and she felt something ignite inside her. She would not let fear win. Not now. Not ever. She closed her eyes and drew a deep breath. She reached within herself to that part of her that had always acted without thinking, guided by heart instead of fear. She opened her eyes and met Kale's gaze, steady and unwavering. The shadows surged forward, whispering, wailing, trying to shake her resolve, but she held firm. Kale's hands were on hers, and together they stood as one, two hearts bound by courage and trust. "Now," Kale said, his voice low and commanding. "Focus. Feel the bond between us. Let it guide the magic." Ilara nodded. She concentrated on him, on the trust they had built, on the moments of courage that had brought them here. The energy of the altar surged, and the runes glowed brighter, shining with a light that seemed to push back the darkness. The shadows screamed and twisted, but slowly the oppressive weight began to lift. Ilara could feel the curse faltering, weakened by her bravery and their bond. Kale's eyes shone with something she had never seen before: relief, hope, and something deeper, more human. "You are extraordinary," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You have done what no one else could. You saved me." Ilara felt warmth spread through her chest. She had feared the forest, the curse, and the unknown. But she had not feared this moment. She had not feared him. And now, seeing the vulnerability behind his mask, she understood what he had been protecting and what he had been hiding all along. Kale stepped closer, his hands cupping her face gently. "I am no longer bound by this curse," he said softly. "Because of you. Because of your courage, your heart, and your trust. You have freed me." Alara's eyes glistened with tears. She had faced shadows, danger, and fear itself, and now she could see the man behind the Alpha King, the man who had been alone for too long, burdened by power and solitude. The forest seemed to settle around them, as if acknowledging the victory. The mist retreated, leaving the clearing bathed in silver moonlight. The runes dimmed, their task complete, and a calmness descended that neither had expected. Kyle lowered his hands from her face, but he did not let go. "Alara," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "you have risked everything. You could have turned away, fled, or faltered, but you did not. You changed me, changed everything." Alara smiled faintly, her hands resting on his chest. "I didn't know it would be like this," she admitted softly. I wanted to help. That's all." Kyle shook his head, a small laugh escaping him. "No, it was never just that. You risked your life for a man you barely knew. You defied the rules, defied fear, and in doing so, you showed me what it means to live." They stood there for a long moment, the silence of the forest surrounding them, yet it was not empty. It was filled with understanding, trust, and a bond that neither could deny. Then a distant sound reached their ears, a soft rustle in the trees. Cale tensed, his instincts sharpening instantly. "The threat is not gone," he said quietly. "There are those who will not forgive weakness, and they will come." Alara's grip on his hand tightened. "Then we face them," she said firmly. "Together." Cale studied her, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him, yet he felt something he had not felt in centuries: hope. "Together," he agreed. The journey back to the palace was cautious. Shadows lingered at the edges of the forest, but neither spoke of fear. They moved as one, silent and steady, their bond growing stronger with each step. Kyle's presence was still commanding, but softer, tempered by trust and the understanding that Alara was no ordinary maid. When they reached the palace gates, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the towers. The city below was waking, unaware of the dangers that had passed through the forest during the night. Kyle released her hand reluctantly. "You have done more than anyone could have imagined," he said, "and now, you are a part of this kingdom, a part of my life, whether you wish it or not." Alara's cheeks flushed. I don't know if I deserve that," she whispered. Kyle smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened the sharpness of his features. "Deserve? Perhaps not, but you have earned it in ways words cannot capture. Courage, heart, and trust. These are worth more than any title or crown." Alara felt her heart swell. She had entered a world of kings, curses, and danger, but she had not lost herself. She had faced fear, chosen kindness, and discovered a courage she did not know she possessed. Cale's eyes softened as he reached for her hand again. "The kingdom still needs healing. The curse is weakened, but threats remain. And yet, for the first time, I do not feel alone." Alara looked up at him, meeting his gaze. "Then I will stay," she said simply. "Not because I must, but because I choose to. With you." Cale's chest rose with a deep, almost audible exhale. "Then let us face the future together," he said. "No matter the shadows, no matter the trials, we face them as one." The palace gates opened silently before them, welcoming them back into the world of power, intrigue, and responsibility. Yet something had changed. The bond between the Alpha King and the maid was no longer one of duty or obligation. It was a connection forged in courage, trust, and the quiet power of hearts intertwined. As they walked through the grand halls, servants and guards bowed respectfully, sensing the change in Cale. He was no longer just the Alpha King to fear. He was a man transformed, a man who had allowed trust and love to guide him. Elara felt a thrill of both awe and belonging. She had begun as a simple maid, overlooked and underestimated. Yet now she had faced curses, danger, and shadows, and had emerged stronger, braver, and forever entwined with a man of immense power and heart. In the quiet of the palace gardens, Kale stopped and turned to her. "Elara," he said softly, "the world may challenge us. Enemies may rise and shadows may return, but I promise you this: no curse, no threat, and no darkness can break the bond we have forged tonight. Together, we are stronger than any magic, any kingdom, or any fear." Ilara's lips curved into a small, confident smile. "Then we face it all," she said, her voice steady. "Together." And as the first golden rays of sunlight touched the palace towers, Elara and Kale stood side by side, hand in hand, ready to face the future. A world of shadows and danger still awaited, but so did a life filled with courage, trust, and a love that neither of them had expected, but both had found. For in the heart of darkness, they had discovered not only courage and redemption, but the quiet, unshakable power of hearts willing to trust each other, and the beginning of a story that would be remembered in whispers and legends for generations to come.